Hi everybody, my name is Christina and I'm going to be your instructor for the closures class. Thank you so much for signing up and welcome. I've been teaching at Fancy Tiger for a really long time, going on, 13 years now I guess, and kind of trying to figure out and learn all these new things about how to do all this teaching virtually. So bear with me, and sewing machines I know, technology I don't. But welcome, and I am going to show you we're going to go over conventional zipper, which also includes shortening zipper. We're going to also do an invisible zipper. We're going to do buttons and buttonholes, snaps, and hooks and eyes. So everything in this video is kind of sectioned out. So if you already know or aren't interested in one of the techniques, go ahead and skip that section. And I will go through everything, and then we can have questions and clarifications when we have our Zoom call. So welcome. Hope everything's clear, and I'm excited to do this with you. So here we go. All right, so first thing we're gonna do is shorten a zipper. So here's my zipper. I'll just push my machine away so you can see it. So here's my zipper. It's just a conventional zipper, not an invisible zipper. You can do this on an invisible zipper as well. So I just put a pin where I want to shorten it. Just for the sake of this video, I'm gonna shorten it a lot. Just because then we're going to go ahead and sew this in as a conventional zipper, and there's some hand basting, and I just don't want to take up too much time doing that. So I'm going to show you how to shorten this zipper. So I have a pin right there where I'm going to just sew. So zippers you can't do this with a metal zipper. With a metal zipper, you'd have to do this by hand. Other zippers that have plastic teeth like this one, you can just sew right over with your machine. So don't worry about busting your needle or anything. It's pretty easy to do. It sounds scary, but don't be scared because it's pretty easy to do. So all I'm going to do is just sew back and forth right over those teeth. Again, if you have a metal zipper, just do this by hand, and you're just going to be hand sewing it over and over to create a new stop. So actually, as we're talking about that, let me talk about the anatomy of a zipper. This is the tape. This fabric-y stuff. These are the teeth in the middle. This is the pull, the thing that zips up and down. And then you have stops. So usually the stops are metal. So there's a stop at the top and there's a stop at the bottom, which are metal pieces. What you're doing when you're shortening a zipper is you're just creating a new stop. You can do that. I generally do it from the bottom. It's a lot easier because your teeth are already together, whereas if you do it from the top, you need to move the pull and then try to sew that, and that's a little tricky. So I usually do it from the bottom. And this is how you do it. I'm just going to remove my pin and throw it. And all I'm going to do is a straight stitch. Back and forth, back and forth. I don't know, I would go over about maybe 4 times or so, just so that I know that when that pull hits those stitches that it's definitely going to stop. So there it is. I just went back, forth with those stitches. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just take my scissors and cut the end. Just cut the extra off like that. So that's how you shorten a zipper. Pretty easy, huh? So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and put this conventional zipper into a piece of fabric. So what you're going to need is, let me reach over and get it here, 2 pieces of fabric. And I cut these 3 inches long by about, or sorry, 18 inches long. You're like, that's not 3 inches long. 18 inches long by about 3 inches wide. I put these 2 pieces of fabric right sides together, and I pre-finished this edge, the edges of my 2 pieces, just to kind of simulate what a garment would have done. You're going to want to have your pieces finished because the zipper goes in there, and you want to make sure that, and you're going to open your seam like that. So what I've done is marked a place from the top that is my 6-inch mark because I shortened my zipper to 6 inches. And I'm just going to show you how you're going to sew these pieces together. You're going to do a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and that's because generally zippers are manufactured to be 5/8 of an inch wide on either side of the tape, so that kind of matches up with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to make a 5/8 inch seam. What I'm going to do is going to start from the top. I'm not going to back stitch, and I'm just going to baste my stitches that 6 inches down. So I'm really hoping you can see all this. So from the top, I'm not going to back stitch. I'm going to baste, so go to a longer stitch length to my pin, because that's where my zipper is going to end. And then I'm going to go back to a regular stitch length and sew the rest of the seam. The reason why we're going to baste that 6-inch bit is because I'm going to have to go back and rip that out later to expose my zipper. So here we go. So I'm going to do a 5/8 inch seam allowance, right sides together. I'm sewing on the finished edge side, and I'm going to take my stitch length dial and turn it to 4, which is the longest stitch length on this machine. So I think my other machine is 4 as well, 4 or 5. So just go to your longest stitch length. Again, don't back stitch. And then when you get to the place where your zipper is going to end, you're going to go back to an original or normal stitch length, which usually is about 2.5. And then I might do a tiny baby little back stitch right here. And then I'm going to back stitch at the end as well. And that's just so when you go to do your, take out your stitches to reveal where you're, expose your zipper, you don't have a whole lot of extra stitches to take out. So this is what I've done, is I've pressed my seam open, and then I've taken my zipper and placed it face side down, so that would be like the side where you can access the pull, face side down onto the top of my seam, my pressed open seam, where my teeth are lined up with the seam line, and my tape edges are lined up pretty much with the finished edges of my seam, just like that. And I've put some pins in there. I'm going to take those pins out because I'm actually going to hand baste this. So what I'm going to do is take just a contrasting color of thread, which is, I'm just going to use red here so you hopefully can see this, and all I'm doing is I'm going to just do really long running stitches down the middle of my tape, my zipper tape, just to hold my zipper in. And I'm going to remove my pins as I go because they're just kind of holding them in there. So these don't have to be pretty or even or anything. All they're doing is just holding my zipper onto my seam like that. And once I get to the end, I'm going to go ahead and just jump over to the other side The reason why you want to use contrasting thread colors because you're going to end up taking this out, and it's a heck of a lot easier if you can see your thread. I use just a double strand of thread. You can use single strand, it doesn't much matter. Just trying to do this fast because you don't need to watch me hand sew. Really just to hold the zipper in. I am a little reluctant to ever hand baste anything, or machine baste for that matter, but the reason why I do this, actually a student taught me this, for some reason it just makes your zipper go in so much better. I think because the pins are kind of make bumps along the tape, so this way what you're doing is it's just all kind of flat. It just works out better. Some magic to it. All right, so just gonna trim my thread, get my needle off of there. So that's just my zipper is hand basted. And now what I'm gonna do is sew my zipper on. So I'm gonna change out the foot on the machine. Let me pull the machine a little closer here. And to change out the foot on this machine, my machine, I have a Bernina, I'm borrowing one of the Fancy Tiger machines. My Bernina has a pretty similar way to change the foot. So this is your zipper foot, and to take the foot off, and just refer to your manual depending on your machine, they're pretty much the same. So there's a black button on this. I'm just going to kind of pull it toward me. The foot just falls right off. And then I have to put the zipper on either the left side or the right side. I usually just start with the left. If I have to change it, then I just change it. So this mechanism that holds the foot just kind of is a curve hook thing. And then it's just going to hook over the bar, and you just drop your presser foot and it snaps right in there. Sometimes I have to zhuzh it a little bit to kind of get it in the right place. Now all I'm going to do is sew down the middle of my zipper tape, kind of where I basted, across the bottom and back up. The one thing that I don't love is this pull. So I always call this pull the enemy. What I'm going to do is, since I have it kind of stuck up like that, I'm going to push it down a little bit. I'm going to really try to avoid that because it's just going to push my stitches out to the right. So I'm going to start sewing. Let me get down about a couple stitches down, and I'm going to then leave my needle down, lift my presser foot, and push that. Try to pull a little bit up. If you're sitting, if your presser foot's sitting on the pull like that, you can just kind of walk it till it flattens out a little bit. This is the hardest part of this. Everything else is super easy. Okay, I'm going to continue sewing. I want to make sure the left side of my zipper foot is riding along my teeth. That's how I'm going to have my stitches be pretty even. I recommend using a matching thread color because this can be a little tricky, especially if you're using contrast, because it's going to show. You can also do this from the top side so that you can be a little more exacting with it. I just happen to like to do it from the underneath side, the seam side, where I can see the seam. So get down to the bottom, just right above where I created that new stop when I shortened it. Needles down, presser foot up, pivot, presser foot back down. Gonna come right across my teeth. Again, if you're doing a metal zipper, you have to kind of walk it and make sure you're kind of landing in between the metal teeth, because if your needle hits a metal tooth, it's gonna bust your needle for sure. Okay, so I came across, needle down, presser foot up, pivot again, and then come back up the other side. And I'm gonna come pretty far up, and then I'm going to attempt, not always great at this, but I'm going to unzip, push this down as much as I can to get past that pull. Yeah, that worked pretty well. Double backstitch. All right, so my zipper is in. And now all I have to do is remove my stitches, my basted stitches in the middle, and then my hand basted stitches on that we're holding the zipper in. Ooh, words. So I'm just gonna take out those stitches and I'll show you what we end up with. Okay, so I have taken out my basting stitches, both the machine basted stitches and my hand basted stitches. I just, through the magic of video, did that so you don't have to watch me rip out stitches. So there is, so here's the back side where I sewed the zipper on, and here's the front side. Actually, my bobbin color, thread color is gray, so that's why that is gray. Long story, not that interesting, or else I would have had red bobbin thread too. So I took those machine basted stitches out to expose the zipper, and voila, there you go. There's a zipper on there. Again, you can do this on the top side if you want to get really exacting, especially if you're using contrast color thread. Please, oh please, do it from the top side because everybody's going to see that. The other thing I forgot to mention when I was putting on the zipper foot is that you can put it on the left side or the right side. The whole reason behind why you can put it on the left side or the right side is because basically just think about, you want your needle to be able to get closer to the teeth without the presser foot getting in the way. So think about that. So if you kind of get it set up and you're like, wow, this presser foot is gonna kind of ride on top of the teeth and the pull, then switch it over to the other side. Most machines presser feet can go on the left side or the right side. So that is the conventional zipper for you. And next we're going to go ahead and do my most favorite thing, which is the invisible zipper. You're going to love invisible zippers. Okay, let's move on to invisible zippers. I prefer to put invisible zippers in over conventional zippers. I find them a lot quicker. You don't have to do all that basting, and invisible zippers are fantastic because, oh, here's an invisible zipper, because you can't see them, hence the invisible part, because you sew so close to the teeth that they're going to be right up there. Next, the seam is kind of right close to the teeth, and so when you zip it up, it just looks like a seam and you can't see the teeth. So here's an invisible zipper, and you can kind of see how it is different. You can't see the teeth from the top side. You can only see the pull. I'm going to flip it over. I've already done this, but I'm going to show you, I'm just going to talk you through this because I'm wearing this really weird neck video thing that my phone mounts to it, and I feel like you get really dizzy if you're just like walking along with me, so I'm going to try to be still and not take you over to the ironing board with me. Okay, so when you unzip an invisible zipper and flip it over to the back side of the zipper, you're going to see that these teeth, they kind of coil back. They're different from a conventional zipper, but they kind of roll back and forth like that. So if you take your finger, you have to do this when it's unzipped, and push the teeth and kind of coil it back. And then what you're going to do is go over to your ironing board and you're going to iron those teeth down flat. You can only get just, you can't get it all the way because the pull is kind of a big piece of metal. So you can only flatten it until the pull prevents you from doing that. So you're just going to iron it down, unroll it, or I guess roll it back might be a better way to say that. Take your iron it down, and then the heat from your iron will press those teeth so that they kind of flatten out like that. It's just going to be a lot easier to get your stitch close to those teeth if they're kind of rolled flat. And then once you zip the zipper back up, they'll roll back into their original state again. So after you press it, don't zip your zipper up, leave it unzipped. So that's what you're going to do. So I have a zipper that I have already pressed the teeth down, so they're pretty flat. I'm going to leave it unzipped, so it does not curl my teeth back. And then here's the thing that always freaks everybody out about invisible zippers, and I have learned this the hard way many, many times, so you're going to listen closely to my words so that you don't have to experience the frustration. All right, so when you pin an invisible zipper to your fabric, so here's my fabric. I put these X's on one side so you can tell the difference between the right side and the wrong side, because I'm just using muslin and it's the same on both sides. So I just made little X marks so that to tell you that that's, quote, the right side of my fabric. So what you're going to do is this. So you're going to have your fabric face down, and you're going to lay your zipper, your invisible zipper, down on one side of one piece of fabric. The difference between a conventional zipper and an invisible zipper is that the conventional zipper, you sew your seam first and then put the zipper in. The invisible zipper is that the zipper goes in first and then you sew your seam. So what you're going to do is, hope you can see this, put your zipper face down with the tape to the edge, not the teeth to the edge. So you're going to have one side of your zipper kind of flying out there and being... Okay, moving on. So I've got some little thread in here that's bugging me. I've got to take it out. Okay, so now what you're going to do is make sure that the tape is to the edge of the finished side, not the teeth, and that your invisible zipper is face down. I'm going to put some pins in here and hold it up so you can see what I'm doing. This feels really counterintuitive, and I used to hate putting zippers in because they kind of freaked me out, but now I know it. I've done lots of mistakes, so you don't have to suffer through the mistakes that I have. Okay. My pinning is not great today. Please forgive. Okay, so right side of fabric, right side of zipper to right side of fabric. And again, when I say right side of zipper, I mean the side that you can access the pull. And you want to make sure the tape is to this edge, not the teeth. And then you're going to have one side just kind of hanging out, doing its own thing. So that's how you put it on first. Then I'm going to pull this machine toward me, and I'm going to use an invisible zipper foot. So this is an invisible zipper foot. I love, 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 love this thing. This makes invisible zipper sewing so much easier. They don't come standard with the machine. That's why I borrowed this machine from Fancy Tiger, because my Bernina does not have one and I need to order one. Usually I just put my zippers in at Fancy Tiger because I love this foot. Highly recommend. Makes it so much easier. So it's an invisible zipper foot. There's a little, like a little finger thing on it, and you want that to face you. If you have a Janome, the foot is a Z foot. So same thing, you're going to change the foot by just pulling that black button behind the presser foot, and it's going to just plop right off, and then you're going to slide that on and lower your presser foot lifter, and it snaps right on. Make sure that you're on a straight stitch and not a zigzag, because you're going to bust your needle if you zigzag. Believe me, I've done it. Okay, I really, really, really hope you can see this. All right, so what the magic of the invisible zipper foot is that you're going to, the little finger thing is going to hang out on the left side of the teeth. And then the teeth are going to travel through, so I guess basically how to explain this, there's a little finger thing and then there's a tunnel on either side. So this side of my zipper, the teeth are going to travel through the right side of my tunnel. So I'm going to drop my presser foot lifter just so that the finger thing is to the left side of my teeth. The teeth are going to travel through that little tunnel. I'm going to just walk it a little bit to get it started. So the only thing you really have to babysit with this is that sometimes the zipper wants to pull over and it's not going to be lined up with the edge, so just make sure that you are keeping those edges lined up, and really it's pretty foolproof. The pins are just there to kind of keep it straight on there. And take out my last pin. Alright, and now I'm getting to the very end, and my feed dogs can't pull my fabric through anymore because the unzipped zipper pull is preventing that from happening. So I'm going to call that good and call that my back stitch. I'm going to take it out of there. Trim my threads, and that first side is on. So I'm going to push this machine back so you can see how to do the other. So this side is on. Sometimes it wants to the tension seems a little tight sometimes on these, but when you press it, it'll press out, so not to worry. Okay, so second side is, trim my threads. How I have to think about this is for the second side, I'm going to take my other fabric panel, here's my right side, I'm going to lay it down right side to right side with my finished seams together. I'm going to turn this around so maybe you can see a little bit better. Right side to right side, fabric on top of fabric, right sides together. And then I'm going to take my free side of my zipper that isn't sewn down yet and flip it up, and then again put tape to edge, not teeth to edge, and make sure it didn't twist. So maybe mess around with an invisible zipper, and so that you kind of become friends with it, because really once you get it, you're like, oh, that was easy. So again, it's really important to make sure that the tape is to the edge, not the teeth to the edge, to the finished edge. So hopefully that makes sense like that. So now I'm gonna throw some pins in it again. There's usually a harder side and an easier side to sew on this as well, because just because you always have to sew from the top down, the top of the zipper down, you so one side, like if you're sewing, you know, a skirt or something like that, and you have a side zipper or center back zipper or something, so one side, like the panel of your fabric, is going to be where it usually is, to the majority of it to the left of the presser foot. The other side, when you sew it, you kind of has to wad up inside on the right side of the machine. So it's just the way it goes. So you kind of have to work with that, because you always have to sew it top down, from the top of the zipper down. If you have questions about that, we can talk about that when we zoom too. Okay, pulling the machine forward. Now, since I'm doing the other side, my little finger from my zipper foot is going to go on the right side, and my teeth are going to travel through the left tunnel. So the opposite tunnel than the first side of my zipper. Don't sew over a pin. And so this is my easier side because the majority of my fabric is to the left. My first side of my zipper that I did, the majority of my fabric was to the right. Just keep everything all lined up. take it out of the machine. I'm gonna push the machine back, trim my threads. I'm a thread trimmer, can you tell? I like to trim threads as I go. Okay, so now I'm gonna zip this up, and I am so happy that right now this zipper is looking like this. You're like, what the heck did I do? So many times I was like, what was I thinking? And I would take the zipper out, put it back in, and yeah, I panicked. And the reason why this happens and it looks all crazy like that is because the bottom flipped. So all you have to do is flip it back, and then it looks right. Yeah, I have totally panicked when that's happened, and I was like, what did I do? All that happens, that's bottom part wants to flip. So before you take anything out, don't panic. Just flip it, and it'll remedy. It's just because these two panels are not attached yet, so it's kind of a freaky thing. Okay, now I'm going to zip it up. And please know that sometimes when you zip it up the first time, it is a little tricky to do that because you're coiling those teeth back in. And it's also very possible to sew for one of your stitches to land on a tooth and sew through it. So work with it, but look at that, pretty, look at it worked, and it pretty much looks just like a seam, huh? That's so great. So the last thing you need to do is then sew from the bottom of your zipper where your stitches stopped the rest of the seam, and I'm going to show you how to do that. The machine again. I'm going to go back to my original zipper foot, or sorry, my original foot, my regular presser foot. That's what I'm trying to say. Snap that in. Okay. And this part is a little bit tricky. I don't usually pin because I want to be able to manipulate my fabric. Okay, so what I like to do is pull the end of my zipper tape, the part that's not sewn, pull it off to the right, lift my foot, because I want my needle to drop right where those stitches ended, and that's a little tricky to do. So I like my presser foot to sit pretty high, like that, sitting on my zipper tape. Try to get it all in there. I'm going to lower my presser foot, and it's still sitting pretty high. No, it's not where I want it to be. You're just going to try to line it up as best as you can. And it's not cooperating. Come on. There we go. So, yeah, as I fiddle with this, you just want to make sure that it's your stitch is going to land pretty close to where your last stitch ended. You just want to connect those two lines of stitching, basically. So I'm just going to walk it till it flattens out. And then I'm going to sew my seam the rest of the way down. All right, so let's see how I did. Sometimes I do beautifully, sometimes not so much. So you can see, not the most perfect thing. Hopefully you can see this. I got pretty close with my new red stitch to where I ended with putting the zipper on. Really, what is the important thing to do is to open up your piece and see how you did down here. So almost always there's going to be a little bit of a hole, some loose stitches, something like that. You can go in and hand stitch that closed. That's actually not too bad. I'm going to probably live with that. Because it doesn't matter if it's the most perfect thing on the underneath side. What matters from the top side. I've got this little pucker right there, so you know, I might see if that presses out. Totally fine to let some of those stitches go. Now that you've done this, you can, because you want to sew from the bottom of the zipper down to the bottom of, you know, say this is a skirt or something. Once that's sewn, if you want to come now from the bottom of the seam and then try and meet up with your original stitches that sewed the zipper in, then you can do that. But you kind of can't do that in the beginning. Don't go from the bottom and try to meet it. It's gonna cause a lot of problems. So go from the bottom of the zipper to the bottom of the garment. Okay, so hopefully that was all clear. We can definitely talk about that on Zoom, but love, 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 love an invisible zipper because it looks really professional and really cool, and I think is easier once you kind of get the hang of it. All right, so we're going to move on to buttonholes next. Okay, on to buttonholes. So here's what I like to talk about with buttonholes. Another reason why I borrowed this machine from Fancy Tiger is because it comes with a buttonhole foot, which I love, 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 love. My Bernina, which is superior in all ways. I'm such a Bernina snob. I love it so much, but it makes a terrible buttonhole. So I decided to show you guys this with one of the Genomes. My machine, my Bernina does not come with a buttonhole foot. Love these things. These come standard with a lot of machines, most machines actually. So what you're going to do is you are going to get your handy dandy buttonhole foot, and you're going to get a button, just whatever size button you want. And this buttonhole foot, kind of mess around with it a little bit. So it has this little lever right here that makes this increase and decrease. There's a little tiny squishy piece of foam right there. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your button, put it in that little part and pull it down so that little squishy piece of foam is squishing that button in there. That's going to tell, that's the size that it's telling the buttonhole to make, because this is pretty comparable to this. Now, just as an aside, because I've had lots of experience with this, on these, I find that the buttonhole that it makes tends to be a little bit bigger than the button, too big for my taste. That's not the worst thing in the world. You don't have to cut the buttonhole all the way open. What I usually do is I get a button that's a skosh smaller than the size that I need so that it makes a good size buttonhole. But that's just totally an aside. Check out your machine. I just noticed that our Genomes do that. So play with that and see. Okay, same thing is you're going to put this buttonhole foot on the machine. So bring the machine here, pull that button or that little button thing so that my regular presser foot pops off. The little attachment part for where your presser foot goes on, so the button's behind that. This little bar is in front. So I'm gonna snap that on. Come on, you. Yeah, so it snaps in like that. I'm gonna tuck my thread under too. Sometimes the thread kind of can be tricky, but I'll show you how to remedy that. Okay, on this machine, I'm hoping you can see all this. Look on your manual if you have a different kind of machine. Most new machines operate like this. So have my buttonhole foot on. There's a little lever thing that is behind the automatic needle threader that has this little lever thing, and it's got a little buttonhole kind of diagram on it. So I pull that down, and that needs to sit in between those two spots on the side of the buttonhole foot, because that's what tells the machine what size button to work with, or to make, I guess. All right, and then on the dials, I'm going to go to buttonhole setting, buttonhole setting. Other than that, everything's pretty good. I always practice buttonholes before I start putting them on any kind of anything, because there's nothing worse than trying to rip out all of those zigzags of a buttonhole. Okay, the thing about this machine too, and again, check with your manual, is every time you go to do a new buttonhole, you have to go to the reset button and back to the buttonhole symbol. So basically, if you're good, and we're just going to practice here, I kind of hold my thread out so it doesn't get tangled up. All right, so please know too that most machines, you're used to sewing this direction. Actually, it's going to come the opposite direction and do one side of the buttonhole. And just to, general, what buttonholes are, all they are is a bar tack, zigzag up one side, bar tack, zigzag down the other side. And then you cut it open. So basically it's a glorified zigzag is what it is. I like to have my zigzag at the widest, so I like to go to the widest width too. So here we go. So it's making the bar tack, and it's going to come toward me. All I'm really doing is just pushing the pedal. And I'm going to stop when it gets down to the other side. And we're going to take it out of the machine and see how we did. Trim my threads. These make pretty nice buttonholes. All right, so there's my buttonhole. Pretty good. Actually, I'm pretty happy with that. This zigzag's a little tighter on one side than on the other, but if you ever want to go over it again, you can sure do that. But then if I want to make another one on these machines, I just have to do the reset button and then back to the buttonhole settings. So honestly, get your machine manual, mess around with that. They're pretty good. I think Genome's really do make very nice buttonholes. So once your buttonhole is made and you're happy with that, then there's different ways to cut your buttonhole open. I just usually use my snippy scissors and I just snip that open very carefully because I don't want to cut through my zigzags, because then that would be bad. Kind of clean it up a little bit. Some people say put some, after you clip it open, put some fray check or something on there, but honestly, after you wash it a couple times, that'll fray out and it'll be just fine. So I didn't cut the buttonhole all the way open, but I'm going to check with my button that's in my buttonhole foot and see what I think. So here's my button, there's my buttonhole. And yeah, it fits in pretty well. But there you go. Some people like to take a seam ripper and seam rip from the button to cut the buttonhole open, come from the bottom and seam rip. If you do that, please, oh please, put a pin in the other end so that if you accidentally go crazy, it'll hit the pin and not split your buttonhole all the way up. So there is buttonholes. Pretty easy, huh? Pretty great. But honestly, practice them before you start putting buttonholes in things, because, and practice on your exact same fabric, and especially if it has interfacing in it, practice that, because you don't want to have to go and rip all that out. So that is a buttonhole for you. So now we're going to talk about hooks and eyes. These are the different kinds of hooks and eyes. They come in all different sizes. This type of hook and eye is for if you are going to have edges that meet. So for example, like at the top of, like a hook and eye at the top of a neckline of a dress. So that would be this kind. These kind are for edges that are going to overlap. So that kind, you've probably seen this type on the top, like waistbands of skirts or pants, that kind of thing. So this is pretty standard stuff. So I'm going to show you how you can sew these different hooks and eyes on. It's more about the placement on the garment than it is about any special way that you sew it. Basically, you just want to sew it and make sure it stays on. I'm going to actually go over a little trick that I just learned not too long ago about threading a needle. I know that seems really standard, but I just learned that there is a direction that you should thread a needle. So instead of, usually what I would do is just pull the thread off of the spool and then cut it close to the spool and thread that end. But actually, thread has a direction, and the direction, it's better and will get less tangly if you thread it this end instead of the end closest to the spool, because it's actually going the direction, it's spun in the direction that you're pulling it off. So what I usually do, and I always have a double stranded thread when I do this, so I'm going to go ahead and pull off pretty much from my nose to my fingertips is a good length. That's debatable, but that's usually what I go with. Clip my thread, and then thread the end that was farthest away from my spool of thread. Double my thread and tie a garment maker's knot. Garment maker's knot, so this is kind of what I usually call a messy knot, and I will attempt to show you this. You're gonna spin it around your finger like that, so it kind of crosses over your finger, and then you're just going to push it off and let the thread roll together, so it just kind of becomes like a tangle, and then pull that tangle down. So it's really not a knot, it's more a messy tangle, and that's what makes the knot. Give that a try a couple times. It's the fastest way to make a knot. It's called a garment maker's knot. I'm gonna just trim off the end right there too. The other thing that I really like is I really like this thread gloss stuff. It's so fine. It's the same thing as like beeswax stuff that you can use. So for hand sewing, this is really nice. This brand actually smells really good. The kind that I have is Sweet Pea, but it comes in lots of different smells. And so all you're gonna do is take your thread and drag it across the thread gloss a couple times, just to kind of give it a little wax on there to make it slide through better. So it's kind of a pain when things get tangly. All right, so I'm going to show you first how to sew on a hook and eye for edges that overlap. So again, like waistband usually is where you're going to find that, waistband of pants or skirt. So let's move these little guys off of here. So I've sewn just a couple of little waistbands just so you can see what we're going to do. So basically what you want to do is have the hook part here, and it's flush. This straight edge is flush with the edge of the waistband, so like that. And then the eye part, or I guess I would call this the bar, is going to go on the other side about right there. So that this is going to make this into a loop and hook onto there. So I'm going to go ahead and sew it on. When I sew things like this on, I'm going to go like about 1/8 of an inch away from that edge too. I don't want it to be completely flush. I'm going to come down just a little bit. So when I sew this on, I'm just going to scoop through one layer. I actually like to make my first stitch pretty deep so I can tuck my messy knot back down into there too. And then I'm just going to go taking one layer, and I'm just going to go through each of these holes a couple of times. So I've done that twice. I'm going to dip under, come back up through this second hole, go through that a couple of times too. I never really cut my thread in between. I just let my thread travel in between the layers of fabric. You don't want it to be seen. And again, you'd be using matching thread. You would not want to use contrasting color thread. Ooh, if I can get this one to come up where I want it to. Come on, baby. Sometimes it wants to fight you a little bit. Almost. I need like a bendy needle for this. Actually, I'm going to come through and then come up through the hole because it was not wanting to cooperate. So then I'm just going to do a couple of Scoop through, just through one layer of fabric a couple times. So really you just want to make sure that this is going to hold. I have a tendency to over sew this and make it really messy. That's probably a little much. So same thing, I'm not going to keep going just because I think you get the gist. So I just sewed, you know, 2 or 3 times in each one of those holes, 2 or 3 times, and then I'm going to jump over here and sew on that one too. To tie off, actually, since we're doing this, to tie off, I'm going to actually end my thread here. I'm going to take one more stitch, and before I pull my loop through, I'm going to go through that loop with my needle, pull it tight, and I might do that one more time. So that's so you don't have to attempt to tie a knot in that, and that usually holds pretty well. So I'm going to trim my thread. We're going to pretend that whole thing's sewn on. I'm going to make a knot again, and then I'm going to sew this bar onto the flip side of my, so the other side of my little waistband. Probably, I'm looking at probably about 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and you want to make sure that it's going parallel with the edge of your waistband. So same thing, I'm gonna just take a scoop and trim off that little knot, come up through the hole, and do the same thing. So just go a couple times in each of the holes, travel through. Since this bar, so these holes are kind of far away from those holes, so I probably would end up tying that off and then starting a new thread for the other side. So same thing, just a couple of times. That thread gloss really helps a lot. It makes your thread a little bit more, have more body too, so it doesn't tangle as much, which can make you very frustrated. So I'm just going to do one more stitch and pull it through. And then if you get any little messies, you can just kind of trim those off. So then I would sew my other side like that. And then basically what you're doing is this comes and hooks. If I sewed the whole thing on, that would be helpful, huh? Yeah. But it hooks like that so that your waistband overlaps and you don't really see the hook and bar. So that's for edges that overlap. For edges that meet, so that's again like at the top of a dress, if the zipper doesn't come all the way up to the neckline, you're gonna have something like that hook and eye. So this kind of hook, that kind of eye. Put these over here. And so what that looks like is on the inside edge, you want your hook part to be up like that, and about 1/8 of an inch, come on, about 1/8 of an inch away from this. So say that's like the center back of the dress, you want it to be like that. And then the hook part is also going to be on that same side, and it's going to be over here like that. So I'm going to get that sewn on so you can kind of see how that goes on too. Okie doke, so I have my hooks and eyes and hooks and bars all sewn on here. This is, again, something like the top of a dress or skirt if you need a hook and eye so it will meet. It looks a little sloppy because I used contrasting thread color, but I highly recommend using matching thread color. The other thing that I did that I wanted to tell you about, if you can see this, so I sewed these little loops down, but I also came up underneath the hook and did a couple of stitches to hold the hook flat so it doesn't kind of flop up and down. So that's an optional thing. You don't have to do that, but if it needs it, it'd probably be really helpful. And then that side I just sewed down the two little loops there. So you're just gonna do plop like that, and that would be the top of like a dress or skirt that needs a hook and eye. The overlapping waistband one, I steered you wrong, pardon me, so sorry, but I think I said put the bar part about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Actually, that's wrong, so sorry. What you want to do is come down, this is probably 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, because what happens is when you loop it around and connect your hook with your bar, you want to make sure that the overlap of fabric covers the hook part like that. If it were closer to the edge, it wouldn't cover that. So just make sure that the bar part sits far enough back so that when it does properly hook, it covers up the metal bits. So sorry about that. Just as I was finishing that up, I was like, oh right, that's what you do. My bad. So that is hooks and eyes, and next we're gonna go on to snaps. All right, so moving on to snaps. I think snaps are pretty self-explanatory. They come in all different sizes. I've seen clear plastic snaps. I've seen fabric covered snaps. There's, so this, I tried to get kind of a large snap, largish snap, so that it'd be easier to see for the video. So there is a male side of the snap, a female side of the snap, and they have these little kind of holes around the edges, and you just kind of sew in the holes. And again, like hooks and eyes, just sew them on enough where they're going to hold. I tend to overdo, and then my thread, and then it looks really messy. So maybe go through the holes maybe only 2 to 3 times. I think that should hold it, and I pull pretty tight too. I just want to make sure it is secure. So I have this little waistband thing that I'm going to show you how that would go on, and I have a little trick that I'm going to use this tailor's chalk and show you how to mark the other side in an easy way. So I always sew I'm going to sew the male side on first, and I want my waistband to overlap like this. So I'm going to sew the male side on here. Again, I don't know if you watched the hook and eye video, make sure that you feed your thread through the correct way and then drag it through some of that thread gloss. Really does help. I'm cheating a little bit. I have a knot in the end of my thread. I'm gonna go in between my 2 layers of my waistband, and I'm just gonna sew around a couple of times on each of the holes. I'm gonna dive in between the 2 fabric edges, or layers of fabric, just so you don't see very much thread. And I'm gonna just go through twice, maybe. That's probably good. 3 times at most is good. But I'm gonna go quick and dirty here. Come on. Okay, so I'm at my last little opening here. I'm gonna tie it off. So one more stitch. Before I pull that stitch through. I'm going to go through the loop and pull it, and I'm going to do that one more time. Just make sure that snap's going to stay on. All right, cut my threads. Okay, here's my trick. So this is going to show me where to put the other snap. So what I'm going to do is take my tailor's chalk and I'm going to rub that on the male side of the snap so it, hopefully, hope it's doing it. Come on, you. Get some tailor's chalk, get some sort of mark on this part, and then when I flip it over and overlap my little waistband thing, I'm going to kind of rub it around on the other side, and voila, hope you can see that. It made a little chalk mark right there. So that's going to tell me to center my female side of my snap right there. I didn't make that trick up, I read it in a book, so don't be too impressed. So same thing, you're just going to sew the female side on just like you did male side, and you're just going to go a couple times in each one of those little openings around the edge. Really, truly, there's not a whole lot of science to this. I'm going to just do once just for the sake of time here. So you don't want to sit and watch me sew this. I know it's not that exciting. All right. Okay, that was real quick and dirty. All right, snip my threads, so voila, a snap on my little waistband. So easy as that. Next, we're going to talk about sewing on buttons, 2 different kinds of buttons. All right, so moving on to buttons. There are a couple of different types of buttons. There's buttons with holes in them, and then there's a button with a shank. A shank is like a little loop, usually a little metal loop on the back. When you sew buttons with holes on, you can just sew with contrasting color thread, whatever you want. You can, on a button, a 4-hole button, you can sew it in a little square or an X or whatever floats your boat. So first I'm going to show you how to sew a button, a regular button with holes in it, and make a shank. Now a shank is good for if you have like something thick, like a coat, and the button needs to sit up higher, so it needs kind of like a little neck on it. And if you want to use a button with holes in it like that, then you're going to need to make like a little neck for it, and I'll show you how to do that. So you're going to start sewing it on like normal. I'm just going to come up through one of the holes and down pretty close. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, you can use a toothpick. I didn't have a toothpick, so I just found kind of a big fat needle, and I'm going to slide that needle in between those 2 stitches so my button sits up a little higher, like that. That's so it gives a little room between the fabric and the button so that I can go back later on and wrap my thread. So it just gives it a little bit of space. So I'm just going to sew that on a couple of times. And then I'm going to come up again from the bottom, but not through the hole of my button, just through the bottom of the fabric, and miss the hole. And I pulled out my needle or my toothpick, whatever I'm using. And then I'm going to take and wrap around the base a couple of times just to kind of raise up my button to give it a little more height like that. After I've wrapped it, I'm going to tie it off. So slide my needle through that little neck and tie it off. So it sits up, it's probably a little hard to see, but it sits up a little higher than if it were just flat against the fabric. You could make this even taller if you needed to, if you had something really thick. So that's how you're gonna make a shank for a button that has holes on it. A button that is already a shank button is pretty straightforward. So I'm going to sew that one over here, come up through my fabric. So this shank button has this little loop thing on it, so I'm just going to go through the loop and take a scoop of my fabric. So I'm scooping pretty close to my stitch. Sometimes if you're working with a double thread and one loop appears, just kind of pull your thread and usually pull one strand at a time, and it usually evens out. So we're going to go through the loop and take a scoop. So you're going to do that 3 or 4 or 5 times, or 10 times if you're me, because I always over sew things. So I want to make sure that they're really going to stay on. So you guys continue to go through the loop, then take a scoop of fabric. And I'm going to call that good. Tie it off. I'm going to do one more little loop to tie it off. Oh, another trick is that I just remembered, if you don't have enough thread to do the loop tie off, you can cut your thread as long as you can, as long as you have, just make sure your strands are as long as they can be, and then you can hand tie it too. I've done that a couple of times if I don't have enough thread. Trim it, and there it is. So there's that shank button, and that's going to be, you're going to use a shank button for something that is going to be thick in between there. Sometimes you see a shank button on, like if you have a button in the loop, a shank button is really nice for that. So that's all I got for you. I hope that was clear, and I look forward to talking to you via Zoom, or if you want to email me, either way. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye.